Welcome to another episode of Twice Told Tales podcast. Today we're going to talk to journalist and translator and contributor to the Gray Zone, Hekmat Abu Khater, who's based in the US with Syrian backgrounds. Hekmat, thank you for accepting our invitation, and please tell us more about yourself first.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm a Syrian American. I lived most of my life in Aleppo, Syria, and currently reside in Manhattan, where I'm doing a consultancy for the Department of Peacebuilding and Political Affairs with the United Nations. And other than what you already mentioned, my journalism for the Gray Zone, translation, dubbing videos, and I write for Mayadeen as well. I run an NGO called Project Onwards that focuses on Syrian youth living in Syria.
So tell us about maybe we can start with the video that you translated for the Gray Zone recently, which was an interview with Ansarallah spokesperson. An amazing interview. We really enjoyed it. Tell us about that and your general view of Yemen and like the resistant forces.
Yeah, so that video was quite enlightening because I've never met with anyone from Ansarallah. I've never met any Houthis before until that video dropped last week. And we chatted with Mohammed al-Bukhaiti, the spokesperson for Ansarallah. And yeah, as you were saying, Chris, earlier, he left a little feeling of shame and feeling of desire, a lot to be desired from our government when it compares to what they're doing and how they're acting in a very morally clear. They're taking a very morally clear stance as pertaining to what's happening in Gaza. He was very clear. He said that they have one simple demand. They do not want to see American servicemen dead. They do not regret, but they feel sorrow for the families of the two SEAL members, the Navy SEALs who have already perished in the Red Sea. And they are fully clear in their statement that none of these deaths need to happen. All that needs to happen really is a ceasefire. It's an end to the genocide, an end to the suffering of the Palestinian people. And whenever that statement comes out, they immediately win the moral argument of the war. They immediately clarify their moral position, and they leave no question left unanswered about the reasons behind this blockade that they're enacting, and they clearly point to what shipments, what ship containers they're targeting specifically. Are any countries supporting Israel or going to an Israeli port? So their stance is clear.
Right. Do you feel there has been a change? Because like in Iran, the view that we have of Houthis is usually positive because they support the resistant forces, and we have always had almost the same view of them. But in the Arab world and in the Muslim world and in general in the world, are we or are people still looking at the Houthis at just Iran-backed militias like that are, or rebels that are a threat to, I don't know, like U.S. interest or Israeli interest, or are we getting a different view of them right now, given what they have been doing recently?
Great question. And before I answer, in the interview, Mohammed al-Bukhaiti clearly states that the decision to enact a blockade is clearly and fully independent to Yemen and the Houthi government. So he actually added, which is quite surprising, that if the government was controlled by the decision was controlled by the government in Iran, he said that the blockade probably would not have happened, and any retaliatory measures would probably have not taken place, because Iran tends to be a little bit more aversive to direct confrontation, especially when it comes to the Houthis. So, but relating to the perception of the Houthis, it has been a tremendous win for the world, in the United States and in the Arab world. In the Arab world, unfortunately, the view of the Houthis, the view of the Yemeni people has been such a backwards one. a view of people who eat qat all day and they chew qat all day, and they do not they're backwards, they're underdeveloped, and they're the lesser developed Arab peoples of the Arab Peninsula, and all we know about them is that Osama bin Laden's father comes from there, comes from Hadramaut, comes from the Yemeni area. So what happened since October 7th, since the Houthis started enacting this blockade, is that people started learning more about the Houthis and started realizing the extent of the trauma that the Western world has inflicted on the Houthi people, on the Yemeni people in general. There's been a war since 2015 happening in Yemen. It's been a civil war, not unsimilar, quite similar to what happened in Syria, a very convoluted proxy war where a lot of countries, regional countries, were involved, but in a clear aim to break the Houthis, break any sort of Yemeni resistance. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and the United States have starved the Yemeni people for 6-7 years, and no one has known about it. No one has heard anything about what's happening in Yemen. Every once in a while, you'd get the Guardian video reporter. They'd go there, they'd wander around, they'd see sickly babies who are dying of malnourishment, and they'd say, "Oh, it's a problem with aid not arriving properly," but they would not mention that Saudi Arabia is bombing the infrastructure to the Stone Age. That not only is Saudi Arabia bombing, but American military officials are going in and selecting targets for Saudi Arabia and letting Saudi Arabia is not doing anything but pull the trigger. The United States, shows up, they decide what the targets are to immiserate the Yemeni people in any way possible and to inflict upon them the most outrageous siege and humanitarian crisis that happened in the 21st century. So
the Saudis are pulling the trigger. I mean, they're American contractors oftentimes that are working for Saudi Arabia. So they hire these like US pilots and whatever to fly the planes, but they're not, oftentimes it's not even Saudi citizens. Like, so it's just a completely outsourced military. So it's just literally America just trying to create
I would never disagree with that. Company. I will always stand by my statement that since 1933, when the first oil exploration mission from the United States arrived in Saudi Arabia has not been an independent country. Saudi Arabia is nothing but a disgusting vassal of the United States and its empire in the Middle East, and it's not been anything but a force of evil in the region. So yeah, I would not disagree with you. Saudi Arabia did nothing but pull the trigger in this outrageous war for since 2015, and now we're finally hearing about it.
Yeah. And it's not only the US and the UK, but there were a lot of European countries, including Sweden, Denmark, Germany, that were sending weapons and bombs to Saudi Arabia and US and British forces. Like, I mean, there are a lot of these so-called civilized European countries were involved in the worst humanitarian crisis that was happening in Yemen, as you said, and we weren't hearing about it on the media at all. I mean, and it's very I don't know, it's amazing how the poorest country in the Middle East and the one that experienced the worst humanitarian crisis is the one that is like bravely and more strongly than any other country in the world supporting the people of Gaza, because they understand what it means to be under blockade. They understand what it means to have a humanitarian crisis and be, targeted by all the military, like all aggressive military forces around the world.
Yeah, and again, all it takes for this to stop is a ceasefire, and we in America, we have the right and we have the capability to do that because we control what the Israeli government does. Well, it's vice versa. The Israeli government decides what we do, but we have leverage that we never use. We have leverage. We arm the IDF, the IOF. We fund the Israeli government to the tune of billions of dollars every year, and we just choose to not take this action. We choose to not apply any pressure whatsoever.
That's true.
Yeah, it's really an amazing interview you did with Mohammed al-Bughati, and the way he speaks, it's so eloquent and so pure, and it's like all you can just feel the layers of lies that are on Western Western leaders. Like when Western leaders talk, you don't hear that kind of just sincerity, which is it's a really interesting interview. I recommend everyone listen to it. And yeah, it comes on the backs of this siege on Yemen that's been going on and starving the people, and they can get. If you look at the videos of the protests for Palestine in Yemen, the streets have more people on them than I've ever seen. I think the only crowds I've ever seen bigger were in the memorial to General Qasem Soleimani. Those are the only crowds that I've ever seen bigger than these in Yemen. These are it's just a sea of people, like a huge, and the U.S. has the audacity to say that government doesn't represent the democracy there, and that the real government is holed up in a hotel room in Riyadh like some kind of Arabic version of Juan Guaido. So it's a really, you can just see the lies that just come out of this, and I don't know how long it can possibly go on. Like it seems like once you set up this kind of a shell game, it has to collapse at some point, because the people eventually just get sick of it. And like in Yemen, they've just said enough. We're just going to fight. So what do you think of the chances of that happening in the larger region are? Like, what do you think the chances of like Jordanians or just getting fed up with being forced,
or Egyptians?
What do you think of that?
Well, yeah. Let me real quick address the divide within Yemen. Actually, if there were any truth to the American statements about the real government of Yemen, quote unquote, it's no longer the case, because since the Houthis and Ansarallah have taken such strong, morally clear action against the apartheid state by enacting this blockade, they've consolidated popular support in Yemen. It's very clear. They had dissent from the opposition coming back and saying, okay, we believe that the right government for Yemen is the Houthis because of such courage in their actions. So that is one point. It has been a silver lining for this sacrifice that the Yemeni people are making. But as it comes to pertaining to other countries, I mean, Jordan yesterday, after the strikes that happened on the border, went on this massive the king of Jordan went on this massive PR campaign apologizing to everyone, saying no, it didn't happen in Jordan, it wasn't us, trust me. we would never touch the Americans. We're also a vassal state. Look at us, we're not half our population.
Wow. I didn't catch that. Did he really say something like that?
He didn't say we're also a vassal state. That's my interpretation.
Okay. Even close to that, it would be.
But
really
it's something like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but even though the Jordanian population is half Palestinian, the king's wife is Palestinian. They've been the most impotent force in the region. It's actually ridiculous. They've been
they're blocking weapons to Israel. They're part of the weapons pipeline.
Yeah,
and didn't the Jordanian government open they cracked down the when the new round of genocide in Gaza started? The Jordanian government cracked down the Jordanian protesters who were at the border wanting to enter Palestine. This is how they've been supporting
the only good
Palestine.
thing I've heard that they've done is they're doing airdrops to a hospital in northern Gaza, which is the Jordanian hospital. So they're airdropping some medical supplies. But I don't even know how sincere that is. There's an effort going to try and get more drops going.
Yeah, they're doing it along with France. I mean, every country that has realized how detrimental their positioning with Israel is for the last 3 months is trying to do anything they can now to save their quickly sinking public image on the global stage. Because yeah, in the West, I mean, you're seeing some dissent, but around the world in general, I hope you pull up this latest round of General Assembly votes in the UN, where they put to the vote the right of the Palestinian people for their state, and 4 countries voted against: Israel, the United States, and 2 insignificant island countries, Nauru and Mayotte or something. No, not Mayotte. Nauru and some other insignificant.
I have never even heard their names.
Yeah, they're 2 countries that, I mean, the US bought their vote, but it's 4 against the entire world. 2, really. Israel and the United States against the entire world. So even France in Paris, they're worried. They're doing these airdrops along with Jordan to try and salvage anything from their public image, because it's clear.
Jordan is going to fly on the plane so that they won't get shot down. Did you hear that?
They did what? Say that again.
The king of Jordan said he or his wife or his daughter will fly on those planes going to airdrop so that Israel won't shoot them out of the sky. That's his level of propaganda to his own people. It's just
wow.
And that's his level of fear, that Israel will strike any plane coming into their air zone, except when they show that clearly they're putting such a stooge of the American empire on that plane that is very useful for them, and that is the only area where they wouldn't shoot it down.
Exactly.
That's
yeah,
true.
they lost that king. That would be very problematic for them to maintain the.
Imagine the half the Palestinian of Jordan that is Palestinian deciding, okay, you know what, we're going to do something about what's happening in Gaza, what's happening with the settlements, what's happening with the failed Oslo Accords. I mean, these people remember, and they are being forced to stay silent. It's clear.
Right.
Yeah.
Talking about UN and UN resolutions in support of Palestine, tell us about about how many UN staff has been killed in Gaza and the recent attack on UNRWA as well. What would you tell us about that?
Yeah. So let me start with a brief background, because being in the UN, I've had a chance to read into the formation of UNRWA and what their mandate is. So the brief history, as you all know, well, few people actually know how complicit the United Nations is. Well, of course you guys know, but few people in the Western world, few people out in protest, few people who are supportive of the Palestinian cause know the complicity, the extent to which the United Nations is complicit in the formation of the modern Israeli state that we know. So in 1947, because of the upcoming end of the British mandate in the Holy Land, the UN General Assembly puts to the vote a partition of the Palestinian lands and gives 30% of the population, 30% of the Jewish population, 56% of the land. And they decide that is completely normal, that is completely just and fair, and they vote on it, and 33 mainly European nations vote in support of this resolution, with 10 abstentions and 13 countries voting against. Because at that point in 1947, I mean, the only countries that were present in that General Assembly hall were mostly European, North American, Western countries. So out of this this vote comes Resolution 181, and they partition the lands, and after that, as you know, the Nakba happens, and the Palestinians are exiled from their lands. And then, as a response to that, out of some sort of guilt within the United Nations comes the formation of UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee and Works Agency for Palestinian people in Palestine. And in 1949, in December, this agency becomes is created, and the aim is to try and placate the Palestinian desires for a homeland in any way by just paying them off, essentially. Paying them off, flooding them with aid, flooding them with whatever they need, anything but any political action that they could potentially take to regain their land, anything, essentially maintaining the status quo. That is what UNRWA is there for, to maintain a status quo, make sure that no humanitarian crisis reaches such a boiling point that the average guy in Gaza, the average teenager in Gaza decides, you know what, I cannot feed my family, I cannot be fed myself. What I have to do is take this rock and do whatever I can with it. So that is what the UNRWA is there for the longest time. And then, as you guys heard a couple of days ago, exactly on the same day of the ICJ's decision on the genocide case against Israel, on the exact same day, to distract the United States, the UK, Australia, a bunch of other European countries decided that they are no longer going to be funding the UNRWA, and they are the main funders of this agency. So, coming as a clear response against against the ICJ as an attack on the UN, as an it was born from an accusation that a number of UNRWA agency workers and employees in Gaza. Sorry?
12 out of 30,000 employees. They're accusing 12.
Yeah.
12, and it's unsubstantiated claims. And so I did the math. 12 out of 30,000. That's 0.04%. So it's not even, it's like percent. So 0.04% of their employees are accused. No, there hasn't been a trial. There's not much evidence. I saw some Zionist Telegram group posting, like, apparently, I don't know who or how they got like all the Telegram or WhatsApp group from the chit chat from a bunch of the UNRWA employees, and they were all just cursing Israel. And I'm like, yeah. Of course you're gonna curse Israel.
Why would you not? Why would you not? That's a stupid question. Why would you not curse Israel every single day, even if you work for the United Nations? You're hearing everything around you. You're seeing everything around. And listen to this. The most outrageous thing is that in the Wall Street Journal article that came right after the accusations and the withdrawal of funding says that around 10% of these 13,000 UNRWA employees in Gaza
30,000. 30.
Oh, is it 30,000?
Yeah.
Well, he's the Wall Street Journal citing directly from the IDF, by the way. They have not looked into any evidence. They just are taking the IDF for their word. As we all know that the IDF is clearly a reputable source of trustworthy information. Because they've never lied, especially in the last 3 months. They've not lied about babies. They've not lied about babies in ovens. They've not lied about the mass rapes. They've not lied about the complicity of the IDF in killing their own citizens in Gaza. They've not lied about forewarning they got from the Hamas attack on October 7th. They've not lied about targeting hospitals. They've not lied about anything. Yeah, but this IDF statement that came and was cited without consideration of any potential trustworthiness by the Wall Street Journal claims that 10% of these 30,000 employees of UNRWA in Gaza have links to Hamas. Hamas, not militants, Hamas activists or Hamas linked people in Gaza. Forgetting to mention that Hamas is the government in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, democratically elected government. Yes,
democratically elected, as we all know, supported by Bibi Netanyahu and his Likudnik party, because they wanted Gaza to be controlled by Hamas. They cannot deal with the socialized, elitist, Western-educated PLO person like the the George Habash types. They cannot deal with them. They cannot argue against them. This is not an apartheid situation that's happening. So they would love to see an Islamic fundamentalist group lead Gaza Strip, and they could easily point, oh, look at their charter. They say they want the destruction of the Jewish people. We can't deal with them. Sorry.
Even though they edited their charter like 10 years ago or something.
Yeah. So that is the ridiculous part. So we come full circle here. Accusations that are unsubstantiated, and even if they are, you're looking at such a minute percentage. But you know what's substantiated? And I shared this tweet with you, Satara. In the United Nations, about 2 months ago, they brought us down to the lobby, and we had a grievance session that didn't last more than 4 minutes for the 101 at that time, but now it's 131 or even more. UNRWA and UN employees who have been killed in the fighting. That is clear. That has happened. That is that is a real number that I'm giving you right now, and no one seems to care. No one seems to mind. I mean, for them to decide after UNRWA employees have suffered so much, and knowing full well that the ICJ had put out a resolution saying that you need to maintain the delivery of goods into Gaza, otherwise we will accuse you of genocide. They fell short of accusing them clearly of genocide.
Mm-hmm.
After that decision from the ICJ, they say, okay, you know what? The one organization that is still operational in Gaza, we're going to stop its funding.
Yeah, I think two facts too that I would like to add to that is, one, apparently the evidence that the IOF, that the Zionists are providing that these were like 12 like Hamas terrorists, is that it was collected under interrogation, so under torture. So
Yeah.
that's just like another weapons of mass destruction level data set. And and you know, the Israelis themselves stopped using torture as a tactic a long time ago, because they said, well, if you torture someone, they just tell you whatever you want to hear. That was like in a Mossad report. It was like, yeah, we're not doing it anymore because we don't get actual actionable information. We just get whatever they think we need to hear is what they say, so that we stop causing pain to them. So it's not a good source of intelligence. That was the Israelis themselves who came to that conclusion. And so now, of course, if they want data, they'll just go and just say, tell us this, or we're going to chop your finger off. And it's like, okay. So they got proof through that method that these guys were bad apples. And the other is that the U.S. government knee-jerked in a second to give guns and missiles and whatever Israel needed to continue killing people, even when it came out that they were mostly killing civilians in these bombings. Even though, I mean, it's not just this bombing. Every bombing campaign of Gaza just kills civilians. The U.S. knows that. When Israel needs, they send like cargo planes full of missiles over to Israel to help them continue to kill civilians. And then the minute just an allegation of wrongdoing by an aid agency that is feeding people who are being bombarded by these, like a desperate population that needs something, the second Israel like breathes us like any kind of whatever evidence on there, they shut down funding. And it's not fun, it's funding to help people. It's not funding to, it's just so despicable. It makes America and these 10 countries, it's the US, Germany, Japan, Switzerland, I think.
Other Western European countries.
There's 10 of them.
Yeah, and that brings me to another point. Another point that comes up from this discussion about UNRWA and where its funding is coming from. It's a horrible thing for the Gaza Strip right now, but it will definitely be a positive in the long run. I mean, why are the Palestinian people in their fight for liberation beholden to these Western European countries and these Western countries in general that have caused so much of their desperation and their desolation? Why are we beholden to these countries that openly welcome Israel to their Eurovision competition? Why are we reliant on these Western European nations who obviously and clearly, whether it has to do with racism or shared cultural experience, or definitely also guilt, like Germany, quote unquote, hint, hint, they feel an emotional attraction or an emotional link to this random Zionist pet project in our region, in the Middle East. So why are we beholden to these fundraising resources? It is entirely clear now that Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, in the Palestinian Authority, is despised by the people in the West Bank. But there's nothing there's nothing they can do, because he controls. I don't know the exact numbers, but he is the stooge who's placed in power in the Palestinian in the West Bank by these countries that say, you know what, listen, we'll withhold funding if you say anything about what's happening in Gaza. And he hasn't said much, by the way, even though they're technically the same Palestinian people. We'll withhold funding We will look into your house in New York that you own. We'll look into your vast amounts of wealth, and we will cut funding ties with your flailing organization. So I think when the Palestinian people will wake up and realize, oh, this funding, this meager funding that's been keeping us down for so long, that has been keeping us silent, is no longer there. We have to rely on what we have. They will realize that these countries that have been funding them, they've been funding them for their silence, and they will act in a more maybe Intifada 3.0 will happen. I don't know, but I think it will be a positive in the long run. We shouldn't be beholden to these Western European countries. They've not been the friends of the Palestinian people, and they never will be.
Never.
So we need to look east, or we need to look within the actual Levant, and that is where the impetus needs to come from.
Yeah.
It's true.
Well, yeah. Speaking of the Levant, maybe you could tell us about how you view Syria in this dynamic. Like, the thing that worries me, I was talking to Vanessa. We interviewed Vanessa Beeley last, and she was. I'm concerned that we're reaching a point in which the Gaza onslaught can only go on so much longer in its current form, because people are. I mean, I think Israel's already trying to go into Rafah. It's which is an absurdity. Like it's like basically declaring war on Egypt. But this can't last very long, and I'm concerned that the narrative to keep the Western public engaged and on the side of bloodshed is going to have to shift in a way that we saw during this war in Syria, where they had to invent all of this like weird atrocity propaganda, like through the white helmets and other avenues, where they were able to actually, and a lot of that messaging came in Arabic language, because a lot of it was meant to direct people who had maybe sympathies to Palestine and misdirect them to hate Assad. And so I think I'm worried that we're going to see a similar thing, but we're going to see an intense effort to get people who have sympathies towards Palestine to have animosity towards Iran. And I don't know, how do you think that game might play out, and what have you seen in your experiences that were shocking to you?
Yeah, so there are grievances all around. If you look for them, you'll find them. In Syria, there are grievances amongst the Sunni population. It's clear. I mean, with the Kurds in Iran and Iraq and Syria, etc., there are grievances that in some cases they've pushed them to forego any sense of nationality and ally themselves with the apartheid state. That is clear, and that has happened historically in the region. But for it to lead to such let me redo this statement and think about how I want to phrase it, because it's an important one. It's a delicate one. For this hatred, this sectarian hatred, to lead to such consequences, like in Syria during the civil war, you had Free Syrian Army representatives and you had opposition leaders essentially willing to cede ownership, historic ownership of the Golan Heights in order for Israeli intervention against Damascus. That is how far we got in the war in Syria. That is how far the sectarian divide boiled up to. You had mainly Sunni fundamentalists, Sunni sectarians, not necessarily fundamentalists, who saw that their real enemy was the Alawite, the Shiite led government, rather than the Israelis, who have been a source of nothing but grievances and nothing but despair in the region. I mean, why is the United States very much involved in our region? Why is the United States involved in coups that date all the way back to our first presidency? Shukri al-Quwatli was one of our first president. It was our first president, and he was couped by a CIA-led coup. And then you go to when I go to university here in the United States, they laugh at Syria. They laugh at countries like Syria. They say, "Oh, look at it, Syria. These Middle Eastern countries. They're countries of 20 coups in 20 years. They make fun of us." but they do not examine the fact that where did these coups start from, and why did they happen, and to what extent was your CIA involved in these coups that were taking place in these foreign countries that were oceans away from anything that could be of any interest to your populace in the United States. Of course, it has to do with Israel. Israel is involved in our politics in a very clear way, in a massive way, and that is one of the reasons why this sectarian divide doesn't really make sense to me. I'll tell you a story that I started earlier. I was in Brussels when October 7th attack happened, and very early on, around October 15th or so, there was a protest against the genocidal attacks that already started by then. And I always remember that by then, like not less than a week since October 7th, the amounts of Palestinians who have died already doubled the amount of supposed Israeli deaths that have taken place, which at that point were still 1,400. And now they've been downgraded to 1,200, and we now know that half of them were actually IDF soldiers. But by then, not a week since the October 7th attack, the number of deaths on the Palestinian side had already doubled the number of deaths on the Israeli side. And for that reason, we were out on the streets in Brussels protesting, and I made the mistake of bringing with me both a Palestinian flag and a Syrian flag, my own Syrian flag. And I was raising both of them and taking videos and participating in the protests with the chants and everything. And eventually I got accosted by a number of people who I assume are Syrian, who had the other Syrian flag, the Free Syrian Army flag, and they beat me up.
Mm-hmm.
The FSA flag, the green one. They beat me up and took the flag from me. They took my Syrian flag from me.
Wow.
It was such a visceral moment for me to realize that we're all here out in one of the most important European capitals, where the head of European Union power comes from, in Brussels, protesting as a unison, as a unit, to clearly make a statement that we, the populations of Europe who have interests in the Middle East, do not condone the reaction, the military violence that's happening against Gaza. And this unison was broken because of interest in a country that is not Palestine, interest in a country nearby, where sectarian divides have corrupted the minds of people and corrupted the moral compass of this
sectarian divide in service of the West. Like, those divides are completely
Absolutely.
in service of the West. They're not indigenous divides.
Absolutely. And in Washington right now, with every additional round of sanctions that are being forced on the Syrian people, you see that always on the front you have window dressing with Syrian activists. They use these Syrians as a visage, as a front facing poster for these sanctions that the United States government would love to enact on their own, even if they weren't doing them in service of some stooges, some youthful idiots in the United States, because they have interest in weakening Syria.
Exactly the same with Iran.
Yeah, they have interest in a weakened Syria. They have interest in a regime in a Syria that has a regime that's changed and not as adversarial to the apartheid state. And they use them for their political and foreign policy agendas. It's
exactly the same with some of these crazy Iranian expats, that if they see you with the Iranian flag, or the Islamic Republic of Iran's flag, rather than the one that stands for the Pahlavis, the Shah time, or the Kurdish flag, they come and attack you. But the only difference is that at least the FSA people were marching for Palestine, but you would never see that with Iranian expats, because they would march for Israel. And there are videos of that. So they're like one step even worse than that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate scenario and situation. And I think that this divide, going back to the original question, is not going anywhere, unfortunately. The way I look at the conflict now in Gaza is by a timeline that's construed on the number of Palestinian deaths. And around 23,000 Palestinian deaths, Saudi Arabia, the Minister of Foreign Policy, or the Foreign Minister, I will have to look into who he was. He made a statement in Davos saying that once the situation in Gaza is resolved, once the war in Gaza is resolved, his government, his monarchy, still had interest in normalizing relations with the apartheid state. I mean, that is incredible,
Of course.
especially with all that's happening right now in this moment for Saudi Arabia to still have such a position that is even open to considering normalization with Israel. So yeah, that is where the sectarian divide comes from. That's where it came from in Syria. Syria used to be a pluralistic society, Christians, Sunnis, Shias, Druze, Kurds living side by side. There was always some grievances. I will never deny that. But then all of a sudden, the
Like
Qataris,
any other country.
yeah, the Qataris showed up, the Saudis showed up, and immense amounts of money were dumped into Syria, and they made it such a disgusting proxy war where a land of grievances, and they destroyed the country. So yeah, that is where the potential one folly of this movement to liberate Palestine could end up in, where Sunnis decide that it's more important for them to oppose Iran than Israel, and vice versa. Syrians decide that Syrians, Iraqis, Lebanese folks decide that the focus is against Saudi Arabia rather than Israel.
How would that be sold to Sunnis though? Like how would Zionists be less of an enemy than Shias? I don't understand.
It doesn't have to be sold that hard. All that needs to be a justification in their mind is that Israel gets downgraded to the secondary tier enemy, and Iran is the number one enemy. Even though Iran has never been expansionist, and Iran has historically, especially in the last couple of decades, been adversarial clearly to Israel. Yeah, that is the scenario where, and here we are today with some of our most reputable congressmen calling for strikes.
Yeah, tell us about that.
How are you feeling? Are you excited for potential strikes to rain on you from?
I mean, we have been hearing that for, I think, for as long as I was born and raised in Iran. I have lived all my life here, and I think that's like a very boring, repeated like statements that I've been hearing all through my life. Sometimes it sounded like more serious, sometimes not. So well, it's fun watching them wishing. But the thing is, there are people inside Iran that, because we know that we are very confident about our military's capacities and like how strong our military is. So we know that if something like that happens, the US and especially Israel would definitely not like to see the response. So
yeah. So let me just interject really quickly, Satira, and ask for Iranian intervention in the crisis that is currently happening, the democratic crisis happening in Texas. We, as the American people, we are begging for a no-fly zone. We are begging for armed support and funding for the Free Texas Army, the FTA, very modern group of rebels in Texas. And we want to see Iranian troops on the ground in Texas, where you can help us preserve our democracy and establish liberal independent Texas. So let me just say that in John Cornyn's state, John Cornyn, who not 2 days ago was saying that we must strike Tehran today.
So I heard of three guys like Tom Cotton, and of course Lindsey Graham, and then one of the other clowns.
Yeah,
but
there are a few of them.
Actually believable said it? Has anyone actually, like, who has any kind of credibility decided to shred their credibility?
No.
Do you have anyone credible and believable in
that's
the
a good
US
question. There's some people that have like a name that would resonate more than others. Like when you hear Lindsey Graham, you just hear Bob Moran. That's what you hear when you hear his name. Like it's like the echo of his name. And so like there's some, and Tom Cotton too is just an insane warhawk. So it's not like someone like, I don't know, someone who's not usually spouting insanity. So when
they have a slightly different way of saying it, but they're saying almost the same thing. It's like, I think it's like Trump apparently it was Trump who assassinated General Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, but it was actually the U.S. political system. They were all happy about it, although they would say that, oh, it was a mistake or whatever. They were all very happy about it, but it was very easy to blame it on Trump, who's like the crazy president and the white supremacist. While, I mean, you have all been doing the same thing. Who was the president? The U.S. president had dropped more bombs on Syria than the other ones, or on Yemen. It wasn't a, the like right wing president that did that. So it's just the rhetoric that is there.
It's funny you say that. It's funny you say that, especially in the Syrian context. In Max's book, The Management of Savagery, he makes such an interesting point that the the only 3 times that the U.S. media and the U.S. political class ever endorsed Trump or ever appreciated or approved of any action that he took was when he struck Syria or when he killed Qasem Soleimani. Right. That was the only time CNN had anything positive to say about Donald Trump and his presidency. And Fareed Zakaria, I after reading the book, I went back and watched it on CNN. Fareed Zakaria famously, after he struck Syria the first time in 2017, after one of the fake chemical weapons attacks, accusations surfaced, Fareed Zakaria comes out and says, "Today, President Trump became a president. Today."
Yeah.
After a couple of years where they were accusing him of being beat on by Russian prostitutes, and they were accusing him of being a Russian puppet. Today, he became a president when he finally did a military action that we've been so salivating for against Syria and against Iran and proxy. So yeah, Tim Scott, Lindsey Graham, John Cornyn, John Bolton, and Tom Cotton, none of them have any real legitimacy, but together, when they come out in unison, like the silly parrots that they are, they put forward an image that the American people want something, but that is no longer the case, especially after the Ukraine war and the American people waking up and realizing what they want their tax money paid for and what they don't want their tax money to be paid for, to be invested in. And especially with the last 3 months, the American people are slowly waking up from their stupor and realizing that these people, these bloodthirsty warhawks, no longer represent our American interests and never have. And yeah, so you saw the reaction clearly. John Cornyn, after making that initial bloodthirsty tweet of his about strike Tehran now and hard, he went back on it, which is something that's never happened historically in American political discourse. He went back on it and he said everyone accused him of being a bloodthirsty warhawk. So he responded, he said, "No, not all of Iran and Iranian people, just the IRGC and the Quds forces that are being terrorist facilitators."
All right.
And he further backtracked. And he said, This is about deterrence."
Oh, Skirties.
But he said what?
He said, "This is about deterrence, not war." When people start accusing him on Twitter of being a warhawk, bloodthirsty criminal, which he is, people started accusing him of that, and he backtracked further and said, No, this is just deterrence. I want to strike Iran and potentially start World War III and get.
He wants to strike the capital city of another country and just say that's about deterrence and not about starting a war.
Yeah.
What an idiot.
It's probably not. It's probably not that he's concerned about his image as being a warmonger or whatever. It's more because he was probably reminded of the consequences that those words would have from Iran, and then more tension. I don't know, because I don't think these people are concerned about their image of attacking Iran, because if you remember, Trump said something similar, like, we are going to attack I don't know how many historical sites or something like that in Iran. And then everyone was like, what? Historical sites? What does it have to do with fighting terrorism or whatever you claim? And then he was like
Zionist talking point that he was given. Yeah, definitely. That's what they really are obsessed with, destroying archaeological sites and stuff.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But I do maintain the hope that they are noticing a pushback from their constituencies and they're realizing that the American people are tired. They're sick and tired. The American people have realized before their stupid politicians that we are no longer an empire. I mean, I believe in America. I don't believe in American empire. I believe in America being an independently minded country that preserves its own borders and preserves its own populace and stops intervening around the world. And I believe in a multipolar
You
world.
should move to Texas. I think that's what you're saying, is you got to move to Texas.
Maybe I should move to Texas. Maybe you Iranians by then, you would have started supplying the Free Texas Army, and hopefully the liberation of Texas starts taking place.
It's pretty wild what they're
Let
throwing now.
Let me read the Trump's tweets back then. The U.S. has no. If Iran strikes any Americans or American assets, the U.S. has targeted 52 Iranian sites, some at a very high level and important to Iran and the Iranian culture. And those targets and Iran itself will be hit very fast and very hard.
Yeah. Well, the thing
it's
about
not about
Trump,
IRGC, it's cultural sites.
The thing about Trump is he said a lot of things, but he rarely acted on them. And that is something I really appreciate about him. And the one thing that I will never forgive the U.S. institutions around him that have corrupted him from John Bolton is his fault. He brought him along, and he allowed Jared Kushner to be bought off by the Saudis. He allowed his family to be bought off by other interests. I don't know what his upcoming term potentially in 2024 will look like, but hopefully much better. But the one thing is that is something I will never forgive the swamp around him, is that he tried to pull the troops out of Syria. He tried to pull them 3 times, and after each time that he would start pushing to pull the troops back to make sure that the United States doesn't get involved in another forever war, all of a sudden, quite ironically and quite by pure chance, you'd have another gas chemical attack happening in Syria. You'd have Khan Sheikhoun happened in 2018. You'd have the Ghouta attacks that have been debunked in 2017, or vice versa, 2017, 2018. Every time that he would start advocating for the U.S. military to pull out of Syria, all of a sudden this event, this random convocation would take place, an escalation of some sort would take place. Same thing exactly happened 5 days ago. The Biden administration put out just a feeler through foreign policy, saying that they are considering, not foreign policy, but they put out a feeler saying they're considering potentially pulling out of Syria, and all of a sudden this strike happens, and all of a sudden all the assets in the think tanks in Washington start saying, no, we cannot abandon the Kurds, we cannot abandon our people in Syria that we care so much for. And now again, I think the U.S. troops are not going to pull from Syria anytime soon. It's a very clear process by now, unfortunately.
True. Yeah, and Iranians hate him, and including myself, hate Trump so much, probably more than any other president. Not that he has done, I don't know, because the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani was it was the worst thing that I can remember over the past few years that has happened. And also that he introduced the worst type of sanctions on Iran. But it wasn't there is a background to it that he wasn't as I said, I don't think he was the main decision maker in any of those things. It was easier just to blame it on him. But we remember him as the person who assassinated the very, very popular interior General Soleimani, and also introduced the worst sanctions on Iran ever.
Yeah, and let me just push back on that slightly. I'm from Syria, from Aleppo, and General Qasem Soleimani liberated my city. I mean, the hordes were right outside. ISIS, al-Nusra, they were right at the door. And then Iran, along with Russia, they were able to push them back. And so I will not sugarcoat what Trump did there, but I will still hold the position that he is much less of an interventionist, and he is much less beholden to the status quo in Washington. And that is where I draw any hope. And the one last thing I draw any hope from is that he personally doesn't like Bibi Netanyahu, and that is enough for me to see a potential sliver of hope.
Yeah, I think one thing is from electoral politics and just presidents in general is that just it's way less effective and way less meaningful than we think it is. Like it's just these are just clowns that are meant to placate us, and electoral politics are meant more to create the illusion of control for the people so that you blame your neighbor for the failures of the government because they voted for the wrong person. Then you actually blame the rulers or the people behind the rulers themselves. So like it's been a problem in the theory of democracy from the beginning. I mean, it's something that like de Tocqueville pointed out in his work on democracy like hundreds of years ago. So it's the problem where at some point it becomes so corrupted that it just becomes a tool of control rather than actually providing the people what they think they have. And so at some point it becomes almost more dangerous than a monarchy, where in a monarchy you can eventually rise up and cut the king's head off and everyone can agree to it. But in a democracy, nobody can actually agree who's in control. And so it reduces the capacity to actually rise up against the government because people just constantly blame each other for the outcome. So yeah, I do think Trump, if given the choice between Trump and Biden, I think Trump would be the least dangerous candidate. But
I agree with you.
And I would never vote for him.
Just to add to the uniparty point, I fully agree with that. In the United States, there is a uniparty. They distract us. They distract us with social issues like abortion, racism, and transgender problems and issues, LGBTQ issues. Yet, where it really matters, when it comes to where our tax money is going and what it's funding abroad, no dissent whatsoever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really agree with you on that. Yeah, this was lovely. Thank you guys. I really appreciate this opportunity and this conversation.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Twice Told Tales podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.